Before we start the final panel for this year's media conference, I did want to say thank you on behalf of the Diocese of Brooklyn and the team at DeSales Media Group, particularly to our event planner extraordinaire, Rachel, who she was the glue that held this whole thing together, so I wanted to give her a special thank you. My DeSales colleague, Christine Mohan, and the entire team that brought this event to life, it really wouldn't have been possible or happened without their energies and input and a lot of teamwork. And I wanted to say a special thank you to all of you for being a part of our communicating community, as Pope Francis talks about in his World Communications Day message, as we've been here, talking about the Holy Father and in the celebration of communication in the Church. So thank you so much. I want to take this. I would now like to invite the communication leaders up on stage to join me, and I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. You guys can come on up. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves at the beginning of the panel, an introductory question of each of them. Due to the unfortunate incident, as I'm sure you've all heard, about the train derailment in Philadelphia, Kenneth Gavin could not be with us today due to travel disruption, and he does send his regrets. So we do have quite a bit of information to cover as we discuss Pope Francis's first pastoral visit to the United States, September 22nd to the 27th, with stops in Washington, New York, and Philadelphia, where he will conclude the 8th World Meeting of Families, the triennial global event sponsored by the Vatican's Pontifical Council for the Family. So it's timely that we're here today talking about this. Feel free to tweet your questions to me at DOB Press using the hashtag that we've been using today, WCDNYC, and we will try to get to some, but we do have a lot of information to cover. We've got 45 minutes with 4 spokespeople, so I should have you out of here by about 10 o'clock tonight. Just kidding. So let's get started. Tell us who you are. Go ahead and talk.
I'm Angela Flood, Secretary for Communications for the Archdiocese of Washington, and I apologize for my voice. The pollen is taking its toll.
I'm Don Clemmer, Interim Director of Media Relations for the Office of Public Affairs at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops.
And I'm Joe Zwilling. I am the Director of Communications for the Archdiocese of New York.
Great. So the expectations around this visit have been huge, drawing attention across all media platforms, both in mainstream press and religious. As we prepare ourselves for this historical moment, we should reiterate to you that the Vatican obviously works very cautiously, and these communicators will be facilitating the dissemination of his communications in the U.S., but we all remain on alert for his official final schedule. So, Joe, I know that you were in the role for both visits of Pope, now St. John Paul II in 1995, and also for Pope Benedict XVI in 2008. Can you tell us from your experience what we should be expecting for this trip?
Obviously, there is already tremendous excitement about the trip. We saw that in 95, we saw that in 2008. I think we're going to see that doubled, perhaps, for this trip from Pope Francis, because he really has captured the imagination of the world. The interest that we're hearing already from people in the media who want to cover this, they want to do it, wall to wall, and make sure that they can bring what the Pope is doing, not only to New York, but to the country and to the world, is already very intense. I think, obviously, the Pope is going to get a tremendously warm reception, especially here in New York. So much of what the Pope talks about, so many of the themes that he hits upon, are things that the Church here in New York, in the Diocese of Brooklyn, the Archdiocese of New York, Rockville Center, Newark, all the surrounding dioceses, it's what we're living out every day. And from a kind of a selfish point of view, I'm really looking forward to showing off a little bit for the Pope, letting him experience the Church as it is here in New York, letting him experience the faith as it's lived out here in New York. He's obviously going to get a very warm greeting wherever he goes. I'm expecting tremendous crowds to turn out even when they can't get into a particular venue. I expect there'll be large crowds of people trying to get as close as they can to the Holy Father, maybe to catch a glimpse of him. And who knows, as we've already heard so many times today, he's a Pope of surprises. He's a very spontaneous individual. And so maybe they're hoping that, maybe he'll veer out of motorcade a little bit and come over and touch somebody's hand or see somebody that he'll reach out to. So it's going to be a very exciting visit. For those of us in the communications world, it's going to be, near exhaustion by the time that we're done with this. I made it through the first visit 20 years ago when I was 36 in pretty good shape. When I was 49 for the last trip, it was a little bit tougher. I don't know how I'm going to survive at 56, the lack of sleep and the nonstop work that we'll be experiencing for really a few weeks leading up to the trip. But I know that when he has been here and we have a chance to look back on it, we're going to see this as a tremendous blessing for the church in New York, for the church in the United States, and even for non-Catholics. I think many people are going to be touched by this visit. They're going to be inspired by what Pope Francis has to say. They're going to come away maybe thinking about things a little bit differently.
Great. So let's talk about what we do know about the Holy Father's visit. Angela, we know Pope Francis will visit Washington, D.C. first. Can you tell us how the Archdiocese is preparing for this, and what can you share?
Sure, Stefanie. As you've pointed out, we can only talk about what we know to be public so far. On Wednesday, the 23rd, the Holy Father will visit the White House and meet with President Barack Obama. Later that day, he will preside at a Mass on the East Portico of the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, with the congregation gathered on the mall the adjoining mall at Catholic University of America. At this Mass, he will also be canonizing Blessed Junipero Serra, which will be historic as the first canonization on American soil, so we're excited about that. The next day, on Thursday, the 24th, the Holy Father will be address a joint meeting of Congress, and then the rest of the schedule remains to be seen. The way the Archdiocese of Washington is approaching this is as an evangelization opportunity, both or prior to the visit, during the visit, and then most importantly, beyond the visit. So not treating it just as an isolated event in itself, but as a chance to build on the excitement of the people who are so looking forward to his being here. One of the ways that we're doing that is through an initiative that we've launched called From Papal Visit to Packed Pews, with the idea being to help parishes enhance their evangelization efforts through regional workshops focused on things like parish welcoming efforts, evangelization through service, adult RCIA, things like that are intended to kind of expand on the excitement. We're also developing service opportunities with the goal of tapping into the excitement that so many people have around this Pope's message, particularly as it pertains to service, and that does so across the spectrum, the evangelization spectrum, whether it's practicing Catholics or people who have fallen away from the faith, or people who don't have any faith but are so drawn to what he says, particularly as it pertains to the poor and others in need. Finally, we're going to be expanding on our already very active digital presence, digital media presence, across all of our social media platforms, and also looking to expand through other new tools that are available, Meerkat, Portico, some things like that are going to be exciting opportunities to build on this. And I should say, if I could, we're using the hashtag #PopeInDC, and we're driving all people, until we have a website, a freestanding one ready to go, or ready to launch. We're driving people to our page on our website, adw.org/papalvisit.
Thank you. Joe, let's go to you in New York. What can you tell us about his time in the Archdiocese, and how are you guys all preparing?
After Washington, he will fly to New York on the late afternoon of Thursday, the 24th. And again, as Angela said, a lot of this isn't yet confirmed. So we know what we hope he will do, but until the Vatican says to us, yes, this is now all confirmed, it's still a little bit up in the air. But amongst the things that we're looking forward to him doing while he's in New York is, at some point, a visit to St. Patrick's Cathedral. As I think any New Yorker knows, we've been, for the last couple of years, doing a tremendous amount of restoration and renovation work at St. Patrick's Cathedral. A lot of people don't realize that, parts of the facade of the cathedral were literally falling off and creating a danger. The stained glass windows inside, moisture had gotten in behind them and were rotting the frames and were damaging the stained glass and things of that sort. So we've been hard at work restoring the cathedral, and we're looking forward to having all of the scaffolding down, having it all bright and shiny and looking new for when Pope Francis is with us, and we want him to visit St. Patrick's for that. Of course, we do know that on Friday morning he will be addressing the United Nations. This will be the 50th anniversary of the first ever papal visit to New York, Pope Paul VI in 1965, almost to the day. It's off by a few days, but this Pope also likes to mark these milestones. He went to Israel, went to the Holy Land this year, or last year rather, to mark the 50th anniversary of that visit of Paul VI. And in many ways, this trip to New York and to the United Nations will mark the 50th anniversary of Paul VI's first ever visit to the United States and to the UN. After that, we'll try to have something that will celebrate the diversity of New York, the faith diversity of New York, bringing different faiths together. I think that in many ways New York can serve as a model for the world on how different faiths can not only survive together, but work together, can pray together, can come together in harmony. When we see so much violence being committed in the name of religion these days, I think what we have here in New York, we sort of take it for granted. All faiths get along, the Jewish, Protestant, Catholic, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, what have you. We all not just coexist, but we work together so well and work together for common goals. And I think that can serve as a model. We also hope in some way to be able to show off what we do in terms of immigration, what we do in terms of Catholic education. So we will try and build that in, and then we'll conclude his time in New York with a Mass. It probably will not be on the scale of some of the past papal Masses that I've been involved with at huge stadiums like Yankee Stadium or Central Park. It'll still be large, but it'll probably be on somewhat of a smaller scale than that.
The final stop is Philadelphia. The purpose of the Pope's visit is the World Meeting of Families. Don, can you shed some light on what's going on in Philadelphia? And others, feel free to jump in and let us know your own, how your own media outlets are planning to cover.
Well, the bishop gave a great distillation of the nature of the World Meeting of Families overall. So I think adding the Pope to that mix, I think we can expect an address, a major closing Mass, not only to the World Meeting of Families, but his entire trip, as it were. And
they had talked about a Sunday Mass on Benjamin Franklin Parkway, correct?
I believe that's what yeah.
And what are the crowd numbers that they're anticipating in Philadelphia?
I think they're looking at a huge number. I don't want to speak for Ken, who's not here, of course, but from everything that I've heard, they're looking at just tremendous numbers of people out on that parkway. As I understand it, it's the area in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and they've got that huge expanse there, and they're really looking to have that filled with people, hundreds of thousands maybe of people there.
Don, as representing the USCCB today, tell us about the resources that are available as a lead up to September. We have a diverse audience today, so what hashtags are being encouraged now? And if we were to bookmark maybe one website in anticipation of this visit, what would it be? Like a one-stop information shop, I guess, for folks?
Sure. uspapalvisit.org, I believe, is the site that we're currently actively building out in preparation of the visit. I think Pope in U.S. is the hashtag, or one of the key hashtags that we're pushing. And you use the word resources. That's going to be key, because he touches on, we've heard so many issues mentioned here today. And while you do see recurring themes, family, mercy, that can be applied across so many of them, you just see them over and over once you start to look for them. But we'll have to have, we're actively preparing what some are calling, the resource library of, facts and statistics and everything else the church in the U.S., the issues that the church in the U.S. and around the world faces, pretty daunting.
Yeah, I think we're all standing sort of on the precipice. I know here in New York, and I'm sure the same is true in D.C. and at USCCB, we have a lot of things that are just about ready to go, but we are waiting for that final word from the Holy See that will allow us to go forward. We want to be able to put up the full schedule. We want to tell people how they can see the Pope. We want to get all this information out there to people. We have these tremendous resources now that we didn't have in the past. In '95, certainly none of this existed, and even in 2008, only 7 years ago, they still were not as prevalent as they are now. Things like Twitter and Instagram and all the rest, these other ways that we have of being able to share what the Pope is doing with people and getting them prepared for his visit, giving them information. I mean, we heard before, I think on that last panel with Monsignor Harrington during the radio show, how sometimes people hear what they want to hear in the Pope's message. We now have the opportunity to when people come to these websites to see, where can I, go, where's the Pope going to be, we can also give them the background. We can also help explain what the Pope has been saying. We have the opportunity to share these resources with them. And, we've got that, ready to go just about. Well, all we need is that last little piece so that we can make it go live and really start the process. There's just so much interest. Everybody, wherever I go, people are asking me, can you get me tickets to see the Pope? Can you,
You mean you're not giving any away at the networking reception?
There'll be an auction later. I have 3 kids in college. But seriously, but what I tell them is, even if you can't get in, because opportunity is obviously going to be very limited, there are going to be so many ways that you can, participate in this visit, even if you're not able to be physically present at a Mass or at a prayer service or what have you.
And that's going to be important too, because as the Holy See has made clear from the beginning, the centerpiece of the Holy Father's visit to the U.S. is going to be his participation in the World Meeting of Families. So we have accordingly kind of planned, as Joe mentioned, smaller venues. There won't be as many opportunities, and we're faced with the opposite challenge of having probably the greatest amount of interest. And so it is going to be a challenge to have the kind of, help people have the kind of experience of this Pope that they want to have without physically being in the venue itself.
Yeah, definitely. We had touched upon this at the Vatican Insiders panel earlier today about how the Pope kind of tends to go off script. And from experience of other visits that the Holy Father has done, we're also hearing he's going to be doing a lot of speaking in Spanish here, in really preparing, just to echo what David Gibson had said earlier, he might say one of the most memorable lines during his trip here, and it's going to be in Spanish. So, how are you preparing to handle this in your respective plans?
I think in New York, if he says something in Spanish, it's not really going to be that much of a problem, given the immense Latino population that we have,
Sure.
Here in this area. So I don't really think we have to think from the other side that he's going to be speaking very directly to a large segment of the population that very often does not feel like they're central in the church. They feel like they're the outsiders, who don't have a place in this church. And I'm hoping if he does speak in Spanish, that he will speak to these Latino and Hispanic groups throughout the archdiocese and throughout the entire New York City area, and we'll draw them in closer to the church. We'll make it clearer to them that they are very much a part of the church. They are not, it's not us and them, it's we, and that they will feel more at home in the church. We'll have the opposite problem that we normally have when, we normally have to be concerned. We have things in English. We have to translate them into other languages to reach the other communities that we have in New York. Here we're going to have an opposite problem, but it's a good problem to have. If the Holy Father does speak in Spanish and his messages are in Spanish, now we'll have to be translating that for our English-speaking audience. We will have, people available to do that. I hope we'll have enough translators available and able to be available for the different networks and stations that'll be carrying this live, so that they'll be able to instantly not only just, what did he say, but what does that mean?
We'll be doing something similar, providing resources. We're currently producing catechetical resources, and as we do with all of our printed materials and other materials, we'll be doing them in English and Spanish. I think it's, as Joe mentions, it's a good opportunity for people who don't necessarily always feel that they do feel they're on the periphery most of the time. They will be more close, at least closer to the center, and that but really our different cities are the stage from which the Holy Father will be speaking to the world. So we want to do everything we can to maximize the impact of that, both for our local audiences as well as for national and international audiences.
A lot of people know how to report, but not everyone knows how to cover a religious beat or has the sensitivity or understanding of the church and its traditions, or even its leaders sometimes for that matter. But there has been a definitive shift with Pope Francis from past pontiffs. And one, why do you think that is? And has that made your job easier or harder?
I think what we often find, I'm going to speak for Joe here, and Don, I think what we find ourselves doing more often is trying to keep ourselves from saying, well, what he meant was, because a lot of people put their own spin on what the Holy Father is saying. And I think, in particular in this country, where we're so polarized across multiple issues, but particularly politically. And so we tend to see, as Americans, religion, even religion, from a political perspective. And so when you're hearing people focus on different things that he says, for example, the panel, or the conversation that we just heard on the radio show was interesting in that you have a certain mindset, a perspective that comes from different people in the press, and particularly secular press. So there are things that they focus on more, where if you look at what Catholic outlets post or on social media or write, there is a difference in focus. You wouldn't know unless you were paying attention to certain Catholic outlets in the last couple of weeks that the Holy Father said quite a bit about the important differences between men and women. He focuses a lot on the value of unborn life. Those are things you're not going to hear a lot about in the secular media, because that's not a particular area of interest or preferred focus. So we do hear a lot about the upcoming encyclical on the environment, what he says about the poor, all of which are important, but just as we as Catholics have to look at the whole picture of what our faith teaches, we need to constantly remind the secular press that they need to look at the whole picture too in order to fully grasp what we are and who we are as Catholics. One
thing that is encouraging, and you see it with so many of the people that I see here, is when a media outlet will have a person that covers religion on a regular basis. And that really makes our jobs a lot easier. So often, we spend our time almost doing, remedial instruction for reporters. No blame, this is not a field that they have covered before. And, you have to take the time to explain and give background and, what the basics of the church are and try and put things into context. It makes it so much easier when you have somebody that covers this beat on a regular basis. And so they already have the basics. They understand what is being said. They have some idea of the history, and it makes their stories that much more, much fuller. It makes them much more in depth on what the message is, whatever it might happen to be. So for this visit of the Holy Father, I think part of what we're looking forward to doing is providing a lot of background information for the press, for those who are newcomers to the beat, who are going to be covering Pope Francis for the first time, because I'm assuming that all of the newspapers, radio stations, TV stations will be assigning more people than usual to cover this story. So we'll be trying to bring them up to speed, but also be providing resources for those who have been working with us on a regular basis through the years. And I think that will be our responsibility in terms of educating the press so that the press can do the best job that they can in bringing the message to the rest of the world.
I'd say with Francis, we no longer feel we have to fight to be heard. We have the world's attention, and that's an interesting place to be. It makes our jobs more interesting, but my mentor, Sister Mary Ann Walsh, figured it out very quickly. We fly with this guy, she said.
So a final question. We all have special affinities for St. John Paul II and Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, as I am sure members of our audience do too. We were all marked by our respective generations' pontiffs and their visits to the U.S., and we all saw them from either up close or from afar, our nation sharing in their papal trips. What do you think future generations will say about this visit?
That's a good question.
I think from the perspective of Washington, at least, the fact that the Holy Father is meeting with the president and visiting the White House, speaking to a joint meeting of Congress, one, he shows the nexus between faith and public life, which still has value and is important for us to remember. I think he offers an opportunity, particularly for young people, to come outside of themselves and experience service to the poor. I think we'll all have service components to our pieces of the visit, and I think he'll be known particularly to the younger generation for bringing them, making an awareness of the needs of others and their ability to participate in addressing those.
One thing that both the visits of John Paul II and Benedict, one thing that's been true for both of them are the personal stories on how people have been touched. I'll leave it to the historians to look back and talk about, the themes that were brought out in the address to Congress and the address to the UN and his various homilies, and, they'll look at those big picture items, and that's important, but I'll let the historians do their job. But what I've heard so often are the personal stories. A reporter who was covering one of the events with Pope John Paul II back in '95, who still remembers that, the Pope looked over and winked Another person who was not a reporter yet was a student in 1979 and just was out on Fifth Avenue hoping to catch a glimpse of the Holy Father. And as he drove by, what a powerful impact that had on her and on her own faith life. I think that is really going to be the impact that people are going to remember, are those personal stories, those personal encounters, the being able to see the Pope either very up close or from a distance. And I am sure that this Pope, who is such a master at touching people, literally and figuratively, I think that is going to be what really is going to mark this visit for so many people. And that's why we want to make it possible for as many people as possible to see the Holy Father. And for those who can't see him in person, to try in some way to make them feel like they had that personal encounter, even if they were not there in person.
Oh gosh, Christian joy and God's mercy. I think he brings mercy, and the earlier talk about like the warming that occurs when he's actually here. I think that's very much him.
But let's be honest, the thing that people are going to remember is something we can't even envision right now, because he's probably going to do it off the cuff and no one will anticipate it. So
Well, we had no questions submitted via Twitter, so what we're going to do is we've only got about 5 minutes left in the panel, so I think we can thank our panelists for coming. Thank you.
thank you.
And I think that this concludes this year's World Communications Day with the Diocese. We hope to see you all next door at our networking reception, which is going to begin now. They're all set up, ready for us. So join us for a drink, stop by and say hi. And thank you again, and we'll see you all next year.